Joining us here today on the kegs is Cameron Burgess from Southpaw Brewing Company. Welcome to the show, Cameron.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. So let's get started with basically, how did you fall into brewing? What's your history in the industry?
So I've been a home brewer for years and years, and about 6.5 years ago, went to Canada and landed a job in a brewery over there. I've done a little bit of study towards my brewing qualification, which was to put on my CV to help me land a brewing job. From there, I worked there for about a year, one of Canada's biggest craft breweries, and then came home to Christchurch and worked at Castles & Sons for a bit over 2.5 years, I think. And then from there, I've moved to Head Baroness, where I'm the head brewer.
Okay, so you started in Canada. Was that intentional? Were you looking to get into brewing, or did an opportunity just pop up and next thing you knew you were in the industry?
I was definitely looking to get into the brewing industry. It was a little bit tough while I was in New Zealand to try and get a foot in the door at the time, but just through luck an opportunity arose in Canada while I was there, so I just snapped it up.
Yeah, it's got a pretty amazing scene in Canada. What was it like working over there compared to over here?
It's definitely a lot bigger. The craft breweries are probably a bit more established, so there's larger scale of craft beer manufacture, and it's probably a bit more readily available in bars and restaurants and things as compared to New Zealand.
And so how did you come up with Southpaw? Where did that come from when you decided, right, it's time to make our own brewery?
Well, something that I've always sort of dreamed of. I mean, anyone who's in brewing always kind of dreams of doing their own thing. So it was sort of with a bit of motivation from my partner Penny and our friend Jeff, kicked me into gear, and we sort of together started it up. Simple as that. Yeah.
Nice. And I believe this year, only a couple of weeks ago, the New Zealand Brewers Guild Awards, Southpaw picked up a couple of medals.
Yeah, we did quite well. A couple of silvers for our Riding Pine Red IPA and the Prince American ESB, so we're really happy with that. Good indication that the beers we're making are not too bad.
Nice. Oh, well done. So when you left Castles, you started at Stainless Brewing.
Yep.
Which is now turned into be a Baroness Brewery.
Yep.
When it was Stainless, that was a full contract brewing brewery. So what exactly is that? What's contract brewing?
So contract brewing is basically beer that gets brewed under contract for another brewery or brewing company. So we basically get supplied with either a recipe or work in conjunction with another brewer to manufacture their beer for them. So we're not in charge of selling it to bars and things like that. We're in charge of producing the beer and then giving it to them for a fee.
That's got to be a really interesting thing for a brewer, because potentially I can imagine you'd be brewing a lot of beers that you might not necessarily brew if it was totally up to you.
Absolutely, yep. Definitely make a lot of beers that I wouldn't brew. Get a lot of experience with ingredients and learning about maybe things that you've never tried before in a brewery, maybe because it's not your personal preference, or maybe because you've never thought of it. It also is quite challenging. Obviously, brewers, that's like their child you're looking after, basically. So you've got to, treat the beer with the same respect that you would your own beer. So it does present its own challenges, but ultimately it's a really, really nice thing.
And it's left you enough time to be able to throw some of your own great brews in there.
That's right. We sort of started Southpaw as a contract brewery itself. We don't own the brewery I work for, but I brew it for myself under contract, if that makes sense. We started doing that by just leasing the brewery out on the weekends and coming into work 7 days a week, which was a little bit tiresome, but helped us with the initial startup cost of starting a brewery, and now we're sort of just a regular contract customer.
Nice. So over the time that you've been brewing, what would you say is the best beer you've brewed, or your favourite beer out of everything you've made?
It's a tough one to answer. I think especially because every time I taste a beer fresh that I've just filtered, I'm like, oh, that's the best one I've ever made, and then the next one comes along and no, maybe it's this one. But I think the first time I made our American ESB, it's a style of beer that maybe is a little bit underappreciated, and I just thought it was so perfectly balanced. I was so happy with it. I think a lot of times maybe I make beers that I myself like more than maybe everyone else would like, but I was super happy with that one. Yeah.
And that's one of the ones that won silver?
Yep, that's right, yeah.
Well, the judges agree with you then.
Yeah.
So what's the future for Southpaw? Where's that heading?
So we're currently in getting our bottle labels designed. We're in the first stages of that. So hopefully that will all be completed around Christmas, and then Southpaw will be in bottles and on supermarket shelves come early 2018.
Fantastic.
Yeah, which is pretty exciting for us. And other than that, just continuing to make beer we like and get it out there.
So do you have a bottling line where you are, or will you be contracting the bottling?
More than likely we'll contract the bottling, probably to Three Boys Brewery. They do the contract bottling already for most of the beers we produce at the brewery that get bottled, and they do a great job, and the quality of the beer is fantastic. So I think that's the easiest and most logical choice.
Oh, fantastic. And so right at the moment, what are you drinking? We're just coming out of spring here and heading towards summer.
Aside from everything, I typically, if I feel like a beer, I'll just drink a lager. It sounds a little bit boring, but I quite like just fairly plain lagers or pilsners.
Clean and crisp.
Yeah, exactly. Just a nice drink for summer. Sit on the deck and have a beer. That's kind of my go-to.
So at the moment, there's a bit of a debate, not only here in New Zealand, but in a lot of countries around the world, over the use of the word craft in craft beer. A lot of people think that it's getting a little bit diluted because there's lots of big boys coming out with craft beers now, but they make them their way, not necessarily in the true form of an independent brewery. Australia, their brewing guild has just changed theirs from craft beer to independent brewery. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that with any sort of nomenclature of beer and beer names and things like that, there's always going to be a little bit of debate. Personally, I don't have a big problem with calling craft beer. I think it's a fairly inclusive name for what we do. Yeah, I mean any marketing language could potentially be hijacked and used for big breweries or whatever, but I think the public now is quite discerning with knowing actually what's being produced at independent breweries and what's been produced by Lion or DB. So I think the beer drinking public is so educated now that I don't really see it as a massive problem. In saying that, people decide to change it to, in the States that people were quite often using words to describe how much volume the brewery produced rather than whether or not it was craft or boutique or what have you. And I think just with whatever you go with, someone will be able to find different holes to pick in it and debate about. So to me, it's not a major issue.
Nice. There's been some talk of the fact that New Zealand should have a specific beer, potentially a style that we can promote, especially to overseas markets, as a New Zealand beer. Do you have any thoughts on what you think might fit that type of style?
I think something like a sort of warmish fermented pilsner with an ale yeast with a lot of really classic New Zealand hops in it is something that is a style that's a little bit unique to New Zealand and kind of encapsulates what the New Zealand craft beer industry is historically and still is a little bit about. It's a kind of hybrid style. It's a little bit unique to New Zealand, and the hops can be showcased enough, and they're really distinct and super New Zealand.
It's been great to have you here and answer some of our questions and give us a little bit of insight into yourself and the Southpaw Brewing Company. So thank you very much for coming along.
Thanks for having me.